If I can feel her aura, I just don't have it.
The Biden White House, for the first time, have now acknowledged Marianne Williamson's primary challenge to Joe Biden, who, by the way, is yet to announce that he is running for a second term. So I'm going to show you this quick clip, and then I'm going to get to some amazing data from back in 2015, 2016, around that Democratic primary, and just how much things changed. So let me first play this clip. I'll give my thoughts on this, and then I'm going to show you this amazing data. And I'm also going to get to later on in this video an example of how the media currently is treating Marianne Williamson.
Is the president annoyed, frustrated with Marianne Williamson for jumping in the race ahead of him? Did he want a clear field to run against the Republican nominee in 2024?
Just not tracking that. I mean, if I had a what is it called? A little globe here, crystal ball, then I can tell you. But I imagine 8-ball, whatever. If I can feel her aura, I just don't have it. I just don't have anything to share on that. Gosh, you guys are making me laugh now.
All right. So incredibly dismissive. In case you need some context for that clip, Marianne Williamson, is treated as like the spiritual orb lady by people who are just dismissive of her. She has an actual solid platform. I'm not saying she's a good candidate. I'm not saying she's going to beat Joe Biden. I did a full breakdown on her announcement yesterday. There are a number of issues or barriers against her, including the fact that she is not a sitting politician and that Joe Biden is the president and incumbency is incredibly powerful. That said, this dismissive approach, I don't think helps Biden. And I'm going to show you some data to help support my point. It's one thing to, have this sort of attitude towards, people who you otherwise just deem to be sort of a nuisance, and they're not really pushing a serious message or anything. But Marianne Williamson actually has a message that resonates. I mean, she's essentially adopted the Bernie Sanders message. And that is a message that has resonated with, I would say, the vast majority of people based on polling and how working class individuals feel about how low wages are, how high their taxes are compared to the wealthy, and how unaffordable healthcare is. Go down the list. Of course, there is a lot of issues that Bernie Sanders addressed both in 2016 and 2020 that still to this day Democratic leadership have simply not been willing to take up, largely because of the amount of money being poured into these campaigns by massive corporations and the wealthy. But apart from this dismissive nature, or apart from this clip, let me just first show you where this race currently stands. So this is a recent poll. Biden leads Marianne Williamson by 73 points among Democratic primary voters. So just 4% back Marianne Williamson and 9% opt for someone else, suggesting little appetite for a Biden primary challenge. So that's where things currently sit. You can see the breakdown by demographic there. But I want to remind you of something. And again, I'm not making a direct comparison because there are differences here, especially, again, considering that Biden is a sitting president and Marianne Williamson is not a politician. But 2016, Bernie Sanders closed essentially a 60-point gap to Hillary Clinton in 2016. He came closer to winning the nomination in 2016 than in 2020. You should not be dismissive of any primary challenge that speaks to the working class needs of voters. So there are some, if you go back to 2015, it is amazing some of these headlines and some of the data that was out back then. This is March 13th, 2015. Poll, the only presidential contender more popular than Hillary Clinton is Ben Carson. Oh, how things changed. Quite a bit for both of them. This is a CBS poll, again back in 2015. Would you consider voting for each for the Democratic nomination? Bernie was only sitting at 14%, with Hillary Clinton sitting at 81%. Most Democrats see a good chance of supporting Clinton. Many possible rivals are not yet well known. Bernie Sanders down here, 58% said they never heard of him. So he's way down this list behind Biden and Elizabeth Warren. This article's great. 16 potential candidates to watch for in 2016. Of course, Bernie's not one of them. So you go down this list. Of course, Hillary's on the list. Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Chris Christie, Joe Biden, Mitt Romney, Rick Perry, Ted Cruz, Scott Walker, Rick Santorum. To be fair, Bernie is somehow on the list under other Democrats, even though he's not a Democrat. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders is telling voters in early primary states that the country needs a political revolution. They were being very dismissive of him back then and throughout the primary, even when he was winning states. But that gives you an idea of just how unserious that challenge was to the media at the time. Here is 538. These are the numbers, people. They only care about the facts, only care about the numbers. Why doesn't Sanders have a shot? Polls show Sanders doesn't match up well against Clinton. He trails her by nearly 57 points nationally. I showed you how that changed. 54% percentage points in Iowa. Let's take a look at Iowa. Hillary Clinton won with 49.9% to Bernie at 49.6%. Closing that massive gap as well. And Hillary also led Bernie by 40 percentage points in New Hampshire. I wonder what happened there. Bernie won New Hampshire, 60.4% to 38%. Again, things can really change, especially when you are speaking to a real message that resonates with people. That is why Biden, the White House should not be dismissive of Marianne Williamson and what she is speaking to. That doesn't mean, again, I'm not saying she's Bernie Sanders. I don't think she is. She's not in terms of her history. I mean, she only recently really became a solid supporter of Medicare for all. So there are real criticisms of Marianne Williamson and, of course, proper criticisms of her chances against a sitting president when she is not a politician, which, as I mentioned in my other video, some people will say, oh, but Donald Trump, he also wasn't a politician. He became a president. Yes, Republican voters are motivated in a much different way than Democratic voters are in primary states. So primary Democratic voters typically go for people that they are being told are the most electable. So because the media typically jumps behind corporate-backed candidates like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, that's who tend to get the votes in primary states. Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, speaks to a much different voting base in the sense that he speaks to people that don't normally vote. So in a primary, he is at a disadvantage because those people, a lot of them that would vote for him in a general election, are simply not registered, not engaged, but they would vote for him if he was on the ballot in November. But when it comes to a primary voting state, a lot of them simply are not engaged enough to even care to vote. So that was always why Bernie was at a disadvantage both in 2016 and in 2020. And also, it's worth keeping this in mind. Most Democrats don't want Biden to seek a second term. So you have this in combination with maybe some real primary challenges, including Marianne Williamson. Biden should not be dismissive of what this could mean, especially if Marianne is the only challenge and all the support that want to see somebody else ends up behind her. And people, because Biden's president, a lot of Biden voters may not even show up in a primary for re-election. So again, there's a lot of question marks around it. I'm not saying Marianne is going to, beat Joe Biden, but you should not be dismissive of Marianne Williamson or the message that she is pushing out there. Now, to end on, let me just play a bit of this clip. This is MSNBC's reaction to the video that we watched of Karine Jean-Pierre mocking Marianne Williamson.
We can see the White House not taking Marianne Williamson's presidential bid all too seriously, nor do we need to. But I think it's actually telling the lack of Democratic challengers that President Biden is facing. It wasn't that many months ago that there was real concerns with his poll numbers down. They were expecting a tough midterms, that maybe there would be, for the first time in several cycles, a real intra-party challenge for a sitting president. That no longer seems to be the case. Talk to us a little bit about how the White House now views the months ahead as they ramp up an expected bid.
I I think the White House is feeling very confident right now. I think the majority of Democrats are sort of lining up behind Biden and expressing their support for him. We have seen a few people sort of raise concerns about his age at 80 years old. Other people, like Joe Manchin, saying that they want to see who else is going to jump into this race before they ultimately endorse. But I think it's still fair to say it's still pretty early. Biden has yet to officially announce, and there's a lot that could happen between now and then. That being said, Biden still says he intends to run. He intends to seek re-election. But I'm sure they're feeling very confident at this point. And like you mentioned, they're not really taking this challenge from Marianne Williamson very seriously.
A number of polls recently have shown that Democrats, by and large, approve of the job President Biden has done, like him personally, grateful for his time in office, and of course for defeating Donald Trump. But so many of them say they actually don't want to see him run again, with citing his age as the biggest factor. How are the White House going to deal with what could be a real enthusiasm problem?
A line that we've been hearing him say a lot lately is finish the job. And without saying it, he is implying that he wants another 4 years to sort of build on the policies that he's already made so far. And so those are certainly things that we're tracking. And you'll have to wonder if voters resonate with that in the same way that they did in 2020.
All right. So look, it's funny because on one hand, they are acknowledging that Biden isn't all that popular with voters in terms of, as the host says there, so many voters say they don't want to see Biden run again. But at the same time, they're saying we don't need to take Marianne Williamson seriously. But if Williamson right now is the only primary challenge, and you're acknowledging that most Democratic voters don't want to see Biden run again, at least entertain the idea. You know, it's fine to be honest about it, honest about how low her chances are based on the fact that she is not a sitting politician, that Democratic primary voters typically go for somebody who is safe, that Biden is a sitting president and how powerful incumbency is. Acknowledge all that stuff, but don't take Biden's win for granted here. And at the very least, acknowledge that what Marianne Williamson is saying has resonated with people in the past. Like it's one thing, back in 2016, Bernie Sanders kind of took a lot of people off guard. They didn't see it coming. But once you saw that working class message resonated, that should have been a learning moment for both Democratic politicians and for the press. But they've learned nothing. Or more realistically, they do know that is a powerful message, but they don't want to acknowledge it because we are talking about a massive corporation in MSNBC and massive corporate donors behind the Democratic Party. So they don't want to push a message out there about how the working class wants to see, a different approach here.